Hello and welcome to Mythos and Logos. There is a memory that every culture shares, though none remember learning it. It lives in the space between sleeping and waking, in that liminal moment when the mind releases its grip on the possible and surrenders to the probable. It is the memory of a war that happened before wars were invented, a rebellion that occurred before the word no was ever spoken. It is the impossible recollection of perfection, learning how to break. Imagine a heaven that has not yet learned to weep. Imagine a throne room where every voice rises in perfect harmony, where discord is not forbidden but simply unthought. This is the paradox that haunts every paradise. Absolute harmony contains within itself the mathematical certainty of its own destruction. For in a realm of infinite possibility, even impossibility must, eventually, become possible. The ancient Greeks knew this when they sang of Kronos devouring time itself, trying to swallow the future before it could betray him. The Hebrews encoded it in the name of their most beautiful angel, Lucifer, the light-bearer, whose very radiance would cast the first shadow. The Babylonians carved it into clay tablets that would outlast their temples. How Tiamat, mother of all, would birth the children who would tear her asunder. Every culture that has ever lifted its eyes to the stars has seen there, written in the spaces between constellations, the story of heaven's first heartbreak. But why? Why does this story repeat itself in Sanskrit and Old Norse, in Sumerian and Mandarin? Why do the Aztecs and the Egyptians, separated by oceans and millennia, both remember a time when the gods themselves went to war? Perhaps because rebellion is not a flaw in the cosmic design, it is the design. Perhaps the universe requires opposition, the way a heartbeat requires both systole and diastole, the way light requires darkness to define its edges. Tonight, we will journey to the highest heavens and deepest abysses of humanity's oldest memories, where perfect light first learned to cast a shadow. We will stand in throne rooms that existed before existence, walk through gardens where the concept of thorns had not yet been invented, and witness the moment when the first questioning thought rippled through eternity's still waters. We will discover how every culture has tried to explain the unexplainable. Why did perfection choose to perfect itself through imperfection? Your support through likes and subscriptions helps these stories reach more dreamers. Thank you, and I'm always curious where our community gathers from. Where are you listening tonight? Feel the veil between past and present, growing thin, as we cross into the highest heavens and deepest hells of humanity's oldest memories, where perfect light first learned to cast a shadow. Before the first thunder, there was a time, though time itself had not yet learned to move in only one direction, when thunder existed without sound. It waited, coiled in the throat of skies that had never known storms, patient in its unborn state. This was the age before rebellion gave thunder its voice, before lightning needed to choose a target. In the Norse cosmology, they call this time the age of Ginnungagap, the yawning void, the charged space between fire and ice, where potential itself was getting ready to breathe. But it was not empty, this void. It was full of everything that would ever be, pregnant with every possible future, including the one where the gods would bleed gold upon the rainbow bridge. The well of Erd reflected futures that had not yet decided to happen. The Norns were still learning to weave, and their threads were all silver, not yet understanding that some would need to be cut. Yggdrasil, the world tree, stood perfect and untested. No serpent gnawed at its roots. Nidhugger had not yet learned hunger. No eagle perched in its crown to scream challenges at the dragon below. The tree simply was, its branches holding 9 worlds that existed in perfect, terrible stillness. The Aesir and Vanir had not yet discovered they were different enough to war against each other. Odin had not yet paid his eye for wisdom, because wisdom itself was still whole, unbroken, unnecessary. Why seek knowledge when ignorance has not yet been invented? In the Greek telling, this same stillness took the form of Kronos' reign, that golden age when time itself was circular, when death was just a word waiting to be defined. The Titans ruled from Othris, and their rule was absolute because no one had yet imagined it could be otherwise. Kronos sat on his throne, the sickle that had castrated his own father resting beside him, not yet understanding that weapons you use against your parents become the very weapons your children dream about. The Titans themselves were forces more than personalities. Oceanus was all water that would ever be. Hyperion was all light that would ever shine. Mnemosyne was all memory that would ever form. They did not rule so much as exist, and existence itself was rule. The concepts of justice, wisdom, strategy, these were still sleeping in the dreams of unborn Olympians. Atlas did not yet know the weight of the sky, because the sky had not yet learned to be heavy. Prometheus had not yet stolen fire, because fire had not yet learned it could be owned. But here is where the Greek memory becomes particularly haunting. They remember that the golden age was already a lie. Kronos ruled because he had overthrown his father. The cosmos had already tasted patricide. The great wheel of succession, father overthrown by son, was already turning. Perhaps this is why Zeus would swallow Metis whole, trying to break the pattern by consuming the future before it could betray him. But patterns, once begun, are hungry things. Move now to the throne room of the Hebrew god, where the angels stood in ranks uncountable, each one a living equation of purpose and praise. The seraphim burned with 6 wings, 2 to cover their faces from glory too pure to perceive, 2 to cover their feet, from holiness too profound to stand upon, 2 to fly through spaces that had not yet learned distance. The cherubim were all eyes, and knowing, wheels within wheels, geometry that would drive mortals mad, but was in that time before time, simply the shape of watching. And among them, brightest of all, stood the one whose name meant bearer of light, Hillel ben Shahar, Lucifer, the morning star. In Islamic tradition, they called him Iblis, the one who despaired. In the oldest Hebrew texts, he is Ha-Satan, the adversary, though adversity had not yet been invented. He stood at the right hand of the throne, so beautiful that beauty itself used him as its definition. His voice, when he sang, created harmonies that would echo in every piece of music that would ever be written. He was, in every measurable way, perfect. But perfection is a prison. This is what the Gnostics understood when they spoke of the pleroma, the fullness, the realm of pure emanation, where thought and reality were indistinguishable. Their Sophia, wisdom herself, was complete in her completeness. Yet completion breeds curiosity about incompletion. Fullness wonders about emptiness. The Gnostics knew that creation itself was a kind of fall, that the moment something perfect creates something other than itself, it has already admitted its own insufficiency. In Babylon, carved into tablets that predate the Bible by millennia, they remembered this same moment differently. Before Marduk raised his winds, before Tiamat became the chaos dragon, there was Apsu and Tiamat lying together in waters that had not yet learned to separate into sweet and salt. Their children, the first gods, were not yet born, and so they existed in that strange state of potential, real but not manifest, like thoughts in a sleeping mind. The Enuma Elish begins not with conflict, but with mingling, when skies above were not yet named, nor earth below pronounced by name. This is crucial. Before rebellion, even names did not exist. To name something is to separate it from everything else, to say, this is not that. The first act of creation is division. The first word is also the first wall. But listen closer to what the Babylonians are really saying. In the beginning, Apsu, fresh water, and Tiamat, salt water, were one. Their separation was the first tragedy. Every river running to the sea is trying to heal this ancient wound. Every tear is salt remembering sweet. The gods were born from this separation, and perhaps this is why they would eventually turn on their mother, children of divorce, carrying the violence of their conception. In Zoroastrian memory, this primordial moment takes yet another form. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, existed in endless light, not bright light. Brightness only has meaning in relation to darkness, but light without opposite, light that didn't know it was light. Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, existed in endless darkness, but again, not dark darkness, darkness that didn't know it was dark. Between them was the void, and the void was not empty but full of potential conflict. Zoroaster's genius was recognizing that the war in heaven was not an event, but a choice, and the choice was not made once, but continuously. Every moment recreates the original decision. Will you choose creation or destruction? Will you choose the lie or the truth? But here's the sublime horror of it. Without the lie, how would we recognize the truth? The Chinese tell of a time when the Jade Emperor's court was perfect in its bureaucracy. Every immortal had their place. Every dragon knew its clouds. Every phoenix its appointed hour to sing. Sun Wukong had not yet been born from his stone egg. The registers of heaven were balanced. Lao Tzu had not yet written that the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao, because speech itself was still learning how to fail. But even in this perfect order, there was something waiting. The Chinese character for crisis combines the symbols for danger and opportunity. Perhaps heaven itself is always in crisis, always balanced on the knife edge between what is and what could be. The Monkey King's future rebellion was already present in the too perfect order of heaven, the way an earthquake is present in the two quiet birds. In Hindu cosmology, the Devas and Asuras were not yet enemies but siblings, children of the same father, Kashyapa. They stood together around Mount Mandara before the churning of the ocean that would produce the nectar of immortality and divide them forever. Indra's thunderbolt had not yet tasted blood. Vritra had not yet become the drought dragon. The cosmic dance had not yet learned that creation and destruction were merely different steps in the same eternal rhythm. But even then, in that time of supposed peace, the seeds were present. The Asuras were older, the Devas more beloved. Every mythology that speaks of heaven before the war admits, in subtle ways, that the war was always coming. Peace was pregnant with conflict. Harmony was teaching itself how to become discord. Return now to that impossible moment that all these stories circle around. Like moths around a flame they can neither touch nor abandon. Before the first thunder sounds, before the first no is spoken, before beauty decides to see what ugliness feels like, there is a pause. Every culture that has ever told this story includes this pause, this held breath of the cosmos. In this pause, everything that would ever be already is. The rebellion has already happened and has not yet been imagined. The fall is both complete and impossible. This is the moment poets call the eternal now, the moment mystics claim to touch in their visions. It is terrifying in its perfection. This pause, because it contains every possible future, including the one where you are lying in bed, listening to these words, carrying in your bones the calcium of dead stars, in your blood the iron that once flowed in the hearts of suns. The weight of golden apples, in the garden of the Hesperides, at the western edge of everything that was allowed to exist. Golden apples grew heavier with each passing eon. They were not heavy with juice or flesh. They were heavy with promises, with the weight of immortality itself. Atlas's daughters sang to them in harmonies that would later teach sirens how to call sailors to their doom, though doom had not yet been invented. The dragon Ladon wrapped his 100 heads around their tree, each head sleeping with one eye open, though he did not yet know what he was guarding against. These apples were Zeus's wedding gift to Hera, but they were also older than Zeus, older than marriage, older than gifts. They grew from seeds that Gaia had wept when she first realized her children would eat each other. Each apple contained the memory of a cosmos that didn't need to feed on itself to survive. When Heracles would eventually steal them, he would not be stealing fruit, but the last proof that once sustenance and suffering were strangers to each other. The Titans understood weight differently than their children would. To them, weight was not burden but presence. Kronos' throne was carved from a single block of time, made solid, not past or future, but time itself crystallized into something you could sit upon, something that could hold even a god's weight. When he sat upon it, all moments that would ever be touched, his spine simultaneously. This is why he could see his own overthrow coming, why he swallowed his children whole. He was not trying to prevent the future, he was trying to contain it, to keep it warm and safe in the darkness of his belly. His wife, Rhea, knew the weight of deception, before deception had a name. When she wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and fed it to her husband, she invented lies. But the stone she chose was not random. It was the omphalos, the navel stone of the cosmos, the weight around which everything else orbited. Kronos swallowed the center of reality and mistook it for his son. Perhaps all deception is like this, mistaking the symbol for the substance, the weight for the thing that carries it. The other Titans carried their own specific gravities. Oceanus was the weight of all water, not just the water that was, but all water that would ever be. Every future teardrop, every unborn rain, every cloud that would one day form, all of it pressed against his shoulders. When he moved, tides that wouldn't exist for millennia responded. His wife Tethys was the weight of all nurturing, every mother's milk that would ever flow, and together they were so heavy that they had to live at the edges of existence, where reality was thin enough to bear them. Hyperion bore the weight of illumination itself. Not light. Light is easy. Light has no mass. But illumination, understanding, the moment when darkness realizes it is dark, that has weight. His children would inherit fractions of this burden. Helios, the weight of being seen; Selene, the weight of being glimpsed; Eos, the weight of being anticipated. But Hyperion carried the whole, the terrible mass of total revelation. Theia, his wife, was the weight of sight itself, not eyes, but the act of seeing, the burden of perception. Together, they were almost too heavy for existence to bear. When they made love, reality creaked. Their children were born, already exhausted from their parents' gravity. Mnemosyne alone seemed weightless. But this was deception. Memory is the heaviest thing in the cosmos, heavier than mountains, than oceans, than the darkness between stars. She carried every moment that had ever been, and because time was still circular, she also carried every moment that would ever be. When Zeus would later lie with her for 9 nights to create the Muses, he was not making love but trying to steal her weight, to distribute memory across 9 daughters, because no single being could carry it all. But the golden apples remained the heaviest of all, because they were the weight of refusal, the refusal to change, to age, to die, to grow. Each apple was a no made manifest, a denial given form. The tree they grew upon had roots that reached into Tartarus, and branches that touched the void beyond existence. It was the axis around which everything turned, and the apples were the weight that kept it stable. When Eris would eventually throw her own golden apple, the one inscribed, "To the fairest," into the wedding feast of Peleus and Thetis, she was not introducing discord. She was revealing the discord that golden apples always contained. The weight of being fairest, of being most beloved, of being chosen. This weight was always present in the garden, waiting for someone to be foolish enough to pick it up. The Titans knew about this weight because they were born from it. When Kronos castrated his father Uranus with his adamantine sickle, the blood that fell onto Gaia created them, beings born from the weight of patricide, of succession, of sons replacing fathers. The Furies were born from the same blood, and perhaps this is no coincidence. Justice and injustice were born in the same moment, from the same wound, carrying the same genetic weight. This is what made the Titanomachy inevitable. Not Zeus's rebellion, but the weight the Titans carried. They were too heavy for the cosmos they inhabited. Reality was beginning to buckle under them. The mountains were sinking, the seas were compressing into forms too dense for life. Something had to give. When Prometheus, whose name means forethought, looked at his family, he saw this weight and knew it could not hold. He and his brother, Epimetheus, Afterthought, were unique among the Titans because they understood time linearly. Prometheus could see forward, Epimetheus could see backward, and between them they could see that the weight of the Titans was breaking the frame of existence itself. This is why Prometheus would side with Zeus, not from betrayal but from necessity. He saw that the Olympians were lighter, not weaker, but less dense. They were gods of function rather than essence. Zeus was not sky itself, but the ruler of sky. Poseidon was not ocean, but the lord of ocean. They were one step removed from the fundamental forces, and that distance made them bearable. But even as Prometheus made his choice, he was stealing something heavier than fire. He was stealing the knowledge of weight itself, the understanding that gods, too, could be too heavy for heaven. This knowledge would eventually damn him to his eagle-eaten liver, regenerating each night only to be devoured each day, the weight of knowing that even gods must fall. When angels knew no shadow, before shadow was invented, angels were transparent. This is not metaphor but physics. Light passed through them without deviation, without the possibility of obstruction. They were made of something before matter, something that occupied space without displacement, that had presence without mass. In the throne room of the Ancient of Days, they stood in formations that would later inspire crystals how to grow, each angel a node in a lattice of praise that held reality together. The word angel comes from the Greek angelos, meaning messenger. But before they were messages, what were they? The Hebrew makes it clearer. Malach, from the root meaning to send. They were the sent ones. But sent from where to where when? Everywhere was the same place, when distance had not yet been invented. The seraphim, the burning ones, were made of fire that consumed nothing because there was nothing yet to consume. Their 6 wings were not for flight. Flight implies movement from one place to another, and place was still singular. Instead, their wings were for modulation, for controlling the intensity of their burning. When they cried, "Holy, holy, holy," the triple repetition was not emphasis but mathematics. They were calculating the precise frequency at which perfection resonates. Below them in the hierarchy, that was not yet hierarchical, because hierarchy implies inequality, and inequality had not yet been imagined, were the cherubim. Ezekiel would later describe them as wheels within wheels, covered in eyes, but this is like describing a symphony as sounds in sequence. The cherubim were the act of knowing made visible, cognition given form. Their eyes didn't see, they were seeing itself. Their wheels didn't turn, they were the principle of rotation, the mathematics of cycles. The ophanim, the wheels, were simpler and more complex simultaneously. They were the machinery of heaven. If heaven needed machinery, which it didn't, but would, they were potential energy stored in perfect circles, waiting for linear time to give them somewhere to roll. When they moved, though movement is the wrong word, they left trails of possibility, paths that would later become the orbits of planets, the spiral of galaxies, the helices of DNA. In the middle ranks were the dominions, virtues, and powers, administrative angels. If administration could exist without paperwork, without hierarchy, without the possibility of error, the dominions regulated the duties of lower angels, though lower meant different, not lesser. The virtues maintained the cosmos, though maintenance implies decay, and nothing yet decayed. The powers guarded the border between heaven and earth. Though earth was still just an idea God was having, a thought experiment in solidity, the principalities, archangels, and angels proper formed the lowest triad. Lowest, again being a spatial metaphor for something that existed outside space. These were the angels that would eventually interact with humanity though humanity was still just a gleam in the eye of a God whose eyes were everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. But among all these beings of impossible beauty and function, one stood apart, not separate, because separation hadn't been invented, but distinct in the way a melody is distinct from harmony, while still being made of the same notes. This was Lucifer, the light-bearer, whom Isaiah would later call Helel ben Shachar, Shining One, Son of the Dawn. The name itself contains the tragedy. Son of the Dawn implies dawn had a child, but dawn is not a parent, it's a moment of transition, the space between night and day. To be the child of transition is to be born unstable, to carry change in your very genealogy. Lucifer was the son of the space between spaces, heir to borders that didn't yet exist. In the Islamic tradition, this same being was called Iblis, from the Greek diabolos, meaning one who throws across, though there was nowhere to throw to, nothing to throw from. The Quran says he was made of smokeless fire, while Adam would be made of clay. Fire rises, clay sinks. The conflict was encoded in the physics of their creation. But before Adam, before clay, before the earth existed to source clay from, Iblis was perfect in his service. He worshipped for so long that some traditions say he wore grooves in the floor of heaven from his prostrations. Other traditions say he was promoted through every rank of heaven, experienced every form of angelic existence, knew every possible way to praise. This complete knowledge was his undoing. When you have praised in every possible way, what's left? When you have explored every variation of worship, every permutation of adoration, don't you begin to wonder about the unworshipped, about the unpraised, about the space outside the song? The Book of Enoch, that strange text that the church would eventually declare apocryphal, remembers more about the angels before the fall. It names them Samyaza, Azazel, Kokabiel, Tamiel, Ramiel, Daniel, Ezekiel, Barakijal, Asael, Armaros, Batarel, Ananel, Zachiel, Shamsapil, Satarel, Turel, Jomjael, Sariel. Each name is a function. God has heard, God strengthens, Star of God. They were living functions, breathing purposes, sentient missions. But a function that becomes self-aware begins to question its function. A purpose that recognizes itself as purposeful might wonder about purposelessness. This is the crack in perfection that makes perfection perfect. It must contain the possibility of its own negation, or it's not truly complete. The strangest remembrance comes from the Gnostic texts, those documents buried in jars in the Egyptian desert, hidden from orthodoxy's burning eye. They speak of Sophia, wisdom herself, who fell not from pride but from compassion. She wanted to create without her syzygy, her paired opposite. She wanted to know what it was like to be alone, to be singular, to create from herself without the mediating presence of the other. Her fall created the demiurge, the false god who would create the material world thinking he was the true God. The Gnostics understood something profound, that creation itself might be a mistake, a fall, a deviation from perfection. Every act of making is an admission that what exists is insufficient. This is what the angels knew without knowing they knew it. In their perfect praise, in their flawless service, in their transparent bodies that cast no shadows, they contained the seeds of their own opacity. Shadow was not imposed upon them. It grew from within, like fruit from a seed, inevitable and natural. When did the first angel notice its outline? When did the first seraph realize that its fire cast light that implied darkness? When did the first wheel understand that rotating in one direction meant not rotating in the other? These moments, if they were moments, happened outside time, which makes them eternal. Somewhere, somewhen, an angel is always discovering shadow for the first time. The silence before Tiamat's rage. In the time before sound learned to travel, Before waves needed medium, there was Tiamat, she who was all salt water, before salt knew to sting, all ocean before ocean learned to drown. She lay with Apsu, the sweet water, and their mingling was not mixture but music, a harmony so complete that to disturb it would require the invention of disturbance itself. The Babylonian priests who carved the Enuma Elish into cuneiform understood something we've forgotten. Chaos is not the absence of order, but order's mother. Tiamat was not chaotic. She was the principle from which both chaos and order would eventually diverge, the unified field from which all oppositions would spring. In her belly, all possibilities swam together, undifferentiated, unnamed, unborn yet ancient. Her name itself contains multitudes. In Akkadian, the word Ti means life, and Ama means mother, but Tumtu means sea. She was the life mother sea, the source that sources itself, the origin with no origin. When the tablets speak of her, they use verbs that don't quite translate. She doesn't move, she is movement. She doesn't create, she is creation creating. With Apsu, her consort, and complement, she generated the first gods through a process the tablets call mingling. But this was not reproduction, as biology would later understand it. This was more like the way a conversation between two ideas produces a third idea that neither speaker intended. Lamu and Lahamu emerged first, the muddy ones, the silty ones, the possibility beginning to precipitate out of the solution of pure potential. Then came Anshar and Kishar, horizon gods, the first beings to understand there could be a line between. They were boundary itself, learning it was boundary, distinction recognizing itself as distinct. From them came Anu, the sky, who would father Nudimud, also called Ea, also called Enki, wisdom itself, though wisdom about what, when there was nothing yet to be wise about. These young gods were noise in the silence. Not loud noise, volume hadn't been invented, but they were differentiation in the undifferentiated activity, in the stillness, separate notes beginning to emerge from the single tone that was Tiamat and Apsu's unified song. The tablets say they troubled Tiamat's belly, but the word for troubled also means danced. They were dancing in the womb of everything, and their dance was creating rhythm, and rhythm requires time, and time requires change, and change. Change was what Apsu could not bear. He who was all sweet water, all potential for nurture and growth, looked at his children and saw his own ending. Not death. Death wasn't possible yet, but differentiation, definition, the terrible prospect of becoming something specific rather than everything potential. He spoke to Tiamat, the words that would create murder. Their ways are verily loathsome unto me. By day I find no relief, nor repose by night. I will destroy, I will wreck their ways, that quiet may be restored. But Tiamat, and this is crucial, defended her children. The mother of monsters, the chaos dragon, the primordial enemy of order, began as the protector of the young gods. What? Shall we destroy that which we have made? She asked. Their ways indeed are most troublesome, but let us attend kindly. That phrase, let us attend kindly, might be the most tragic in all mythology. It's the last moment when kindness seemed like it might be enough, when attention might solve what intention would eventually have to destroy. Tiamat wanted to parent through the turbulence, to contain the chaos her children represented without destroying them, but Apsu would not be calmed. He and his vizier Mummu, whose name means mould or form, the principle of shaping, plotted in secret. They would unmake what had been made, return the cosmos to its primordial silence. This was not evil as we understand it. Evil requires good to define itself against. This was the exhaustion of the undifferentiated, the weariness of the simple confronted with the complex. When Ea discovered the plot through his arts, for wisdom always knows when wisdom is threatened, he didn't hesitate. He wove a spell of sleep, The first sleep, sleep before dreams were possible. Apsu fell into this sleep and never woke, because waking hadn't been properly invented yet. Ea killed him there, in that first sleep, and built his temple on the corpse. The sweet waters became the foundation of wisdom's house. Consider what this means. Wisdom lives in a house built on the corpse of primordial innocence. Every revelation requires the death of a previous understanding. Every moment of clarity is built on the bones of an earlier confusion that had to die. Tiamat's grief was the first grief, and like all firsts, it was absolute. She didn't weep. Weeping requires the understanding that tears might end. She became weeping. Her salt waters, which had been the principle of preservation, became the principle of dissolution. Salt preserves, by killing what would cause decay. But when everything becomes salt, preservation and destruction become identical. In her rage grief, she took Kingu as a new consort. Kingu, whose name means unskilled labourer, the principle of work without wisdom. She gave him the tablets of destiny, which should have belonged to the wise, to the skilled, to those who understood consequence. This was her first act of war, giving power to those who didn't understand power. Then she began to create. But her creation was different from her earlier generative, mingling with Apsu. This was creation as weapon, birth as battle strategy. She made the Basmu, the venomous snake, the Ushumgalu, the great dragon, the Mushmusi, the exalted serpent. She created the Ugalu, the big weather beast, the Lulu, the lion man, the Kulilu, the fish man, 11 monsters in total, each one an impossibility given form. But look closer at what she made. Serpents that flew, lions that swam, fish that walked. She was creating category errors, beings that violated the boundaries her own children had invented. Her monsters were protests against definition itself, arguments in flesh against the very idea of species, of type, of kind. The gods were terrified, and their terror had a quality that terror has never had, since it was terror without precedent, fear inventing itself as it was felt. They turned to Marduk, son of Ea, grandson of the murdered Apsu, great-grandson of Tiamat herself. He was young, perhaps the first being to be young, to have power without experience, strength without wisdom. But Marduk made a demand. If I indeed, as your avenger, am to vanquish Tiamat and save your lives, set up the assembly, proclaim supreme my destiny. He wanted what would later be called sovereignty, though the word didn't exist. He wanted the other gods to choose him, to elevate him, to make him king. The first king was created by the first war. This is the silence before Tiamat's rage breaks into sound. The moment when she realizes her children's children will come to kill her, when the gods realize they must choose a champion, when Marduk realizes he can demand a price for salvation. It's the silence of everyone understanding that things can never go back to the way they were, that the mingled waters have separated forever, that the salt and the sweet will never again lie together in peace. The binding of Fenrir's father. In the halls of Asgard, before the word betrayal needed to exist, Loki Laufeyson walked among the Aesir as blood brother to Odin himself. The rituals of blood brotherhood were absolute. To share blood was to share fate, to mingle destinies so completely that betraying your blood brother was like betraying your own future. Odin and Loki had cut their palms with the same knife, mixed their blood in the same cup, drunk from it under stars that had not yet learned to fall. But even then, Loki was what he was, the son of Laufey, whose name means leafy island, and Farbauti, cruel striker, nature and violence, coupled to produce something neither natural nor purely violent. Loki was boundary crosser, shape changer, the god who was sometimes a goddess, sometimes a salmon, sometimes a fly, sometimes the mother of an 8-legged horse. He was fluidity itself in a pantheon that valued solid things, honor, courage, strength. The Norse memory of paradise is different from others. Asgard was never perfect, only perfect enough. The gods were never immortal, only long-lived. They needed the apples of Idun to stay young, mead to stay happy, conquest to stay relevant. Their heaven was always under construction, always under threat. The wall around Asgard was broken from the beginning, rebuilt by a giant whom Loki would trick into working for free. Paradise, maintained by deception, perhaps all paradises are. In this time before the binding, Loki's children had not yet been born, but their births were already prophesied. The Norns, those three sisters who sat at the base of Yggdrasil, Erd, what was, Verdandi, what is, and Skuld, what must be, had already carved their runes into the world tree's bark. They had seen Fenrir, the wolf who would swallow the Sunday. They had seen Jormungandr, the serpent who would grow so large he would circle Midgard and grasp his own tail. They had seen Hel, half living, half corpse, who would rule the dishonoured dead. But prophecy, in Norse cosmology, is strange. The gods knew their fates, but were still bound to fulfill them. Odin knew he would die in Fenrir's jaws, but still had to father the wolf's killer. This is wisdom and torture combined. Seeing your doom approaching step by step, knowing each step you take to avoid it is actually a step toward it. Loki's first crime, if crime it was helping the gods too well. When they needed a wall built, Loki found a builder. When the builder's price was too high, the sun, the moon, and Freya's hand in marriage, Loki found a way to cheat him. He became a mare, seduced the builder's stallion, and later gave birth to Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged steed. The gods got their wall. Odin got the fastest horse in the 9 worlds, and Loki learned that solving problems by becoming them would be his eternal pattern. But it was the incident with Sif's hair that began to show the shape of things to come. One night, for reasons no story records, perhaps boredom, perhaps mischief, perhaps something darker, Loki cut off all of Sif's golden hair while she slept. Thor's wife, the goddess of fertility, woke bald as an egg, her power seemingly severed with her hair. Thor's rage shook the foundations of Asgard. He would have killed Loki there and then, blood brotherhood or no, but Loki swore to make it right. He went to the dwarves, those master craftsmen who lived in the darkness under the world, and commissioned new hair made of actual gold that would grow upon Sif's head like living hair. But Loki couldn't simply solve a problem. He had to elaborate it, complicate it, make it breed more problems. He pitted 2 sets of dwarf brothers against each other in a competition. Who could make the greater gifts for the gods? From this competition came the greatest treasures of Asgard. Odin's spear, Gungnir, that never missed. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, that never broke. Freya's ship, Skidbladnir, that could be folded up and carried in a pocket. Yet in winning these treasures through deception, for Loki bet his head, and then argued that his neck was not part of the bargain, he earned the enmity of the dwarves. They sewed his lips shut with an awl, leaving scars that would mark him as the silent speaker, the god whose words could not be trusted, even when he couldn't speak them. The pattern was establishing itself. Loki would create a problem, solve it brilliantly, but the solution would carry the seeds of greater problems. He was both poison and antidote, both the disease and the cure that makes you sicker. The gods needed him and hated needing him. He was the necessary evil before evil had been deemed necessary. Then came the feast at Aegir's hall, when everything turned. The gods were drinking, celebrating, being their boisterous selves. Loki had been excluded, some slight, some insult, the stories vary. But he came anyway, uninvited, and began what the Norse called a flyting, a verbal duel, an insult competition, but one that went too far. He accused the gods of cowardice, the goddesses of infidelity. He spoke truths that should have remained unspoken, secrets that were sacred because they were secret. He told how Odin practiced Sidra, women's magic, how he had lived as a woman for 8 winters. He revealed that Freya had slept with her own brother, that Tyr was a coward, that Heimdall's perfect sight had seen things that should have blinded him. But it was what he said to Frigg that crossed the final line. Odin's wife had lost her son, Balder, the most beautiful of the gods, the one they all loved best. Balder had been killed by a mistletoe dart, the only thing in all the worlds that could harm him, and Loki had guided the hand that threw it, though this wouldn't be discovered until later. At the feast, he told Frigg that he was the reason she would never again see Balder in the halls of the living. The gods' rage was no longer the rage of the insulted, but the rage of those who finally understand. They hunted Loki, who fled, transforming himself into a salmon to hide in a waterfall. But Odin's wisdom and Thor's strength combined to catch him. They dragged him to a cave, bringing with them his 2 sons, Vali and Narfi. What happened next was cruelty creating itself, vengeance inventing its own vocabulary. They transformed Vali into a wolf. The irony of it, Loki's son becoming what Loki's other son Fenrir already was, and the wolf Vali tore apart his brother Narfi. With Narfi's entrails, which became iron hard, they bound Loki to 3 stones. Above his face, they fixed a serpent whose venom would drip, drop by drop, onto his face for all time until Ragnarok. His wife Sigyn would stand beside him, holding a bowl to catch the venom. But when the bowl filled and she had to empty it, the drops would hit Loki's face, and his writhing would cause earthquakes. This binding was not just punishment, but prophecy, actualization. By binding Loki with the entrails of his own son, the gods ensured that when he eventually broke free, as the prophecies said he must, he would come to Ragnarok, not just as chaos bringer, but as grieving father, not just as betrayer, but as betrayed. Seeds of the eternal question. At the heart of every paradise lies a question that paradise cannot answer without ceasing to be paradise. It is the question that the serpent asked Eve, that Prometheus asked when he looked at humanity shivering in the dark, that every child asks when they first understand the word why. It is not, why does evil exist? That question comes later, after evil has been named and categorized. The first question, the seed question, is simpler and more devastating. What if? What if it could be different? In the moment before any rebellion, in any mythology, there is this pregnant pause where possibility itself becomes conscious of itself. The angels in heaven, the titans on Othris, the young gods in Tiamat's belly, Loki in Asgard's halls. They all arrive at the same moment from different directions. They look at perfection and perfection looks back, and in that mutual gaze, a crack appears. Not a flaw, flaws can be fixed. A question. Questions can only be answered or ignored, never unmade. Consider what perfection requires. It requires the absence of change, because any change from perfection is necessarily toward imperfection. But consciousness, whether divine or mortal, is change itself. To think is to move from one thought to another. To be aware is to constantly update that awareness. A perfect being that becomes conscious of its perfection has already changed, has already fallen from the perfection that existed before self-awareness. This is the paradox that every theology has tried to resolve, and none has succeeded in resolving. How can a perfect God create? Creation is an act of will. Will implies desire. Desire implies lack. Lack implies imperfection. The Gnostics solved this by making creation itself a fall, a mistake, a deviation. The Hindus solved it by making creation a dance, purposeless and therefore pure. The Norse solved it by never claiming perfection in the first place. Their gods were born flawed and would die flawed. But the question remains, wearing different masks in different mythologies. In heaven, it wore Lucifer's face when he looked at the throne and wondered why there was only one. Not out of ambition. Ambition is too small a word for the first wondering. He wondered the way mathematics wonders about infinity, the way physics wonders about what happened before the Big Bang. His wondering was ontological. "I will ascend to heaven," Isaiah records him saying. "I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will make myself like the Most High." But these are not the words of ambition, they are the words of experiment. What happens if there are two Most Highs? Does the universe collapse? Does logic fail? Or does something else emerge? Something that required opposition to exist. In Greek mythology, this question took the form of succession anxiety. Uranus knew Kronos would overthrow him. The sky itself knew that time would eventually dominate space. Kronos knew Zeus would overthrow him. Time knew that force would eventually dominate duration. Each generation of gods asked, "What if we didn't have to die?" And in asking, guaranteed their death. But Zeus was clever. When he heard he would be overthrown by his own son, he swallowed Metis, wisdom herself, while she was pregnant. He absorbed the question into himself, made it part of his being rather than something external he had to face. Athena was born from his head, wisdom emerging directly from power without the mediation of opposition. He thought he had broken the cycle, but the question remained, just internalized. Every headache Zeus would ever have was the question trying to get out. The Babylonian gods faced the question collectively. What if we didn't have to live with chaos? What if we could order everything, name everything, assign everything a place? But in killing Tiamat, in making the world from her corpse, they discovered that chaos wasn't something external to be defeated. It was internal, structural. The ordered world was made of chaos flesh. Every mountain was Tiamat's bone, every river her blood. The order was just chaos wearing a mask, and the mask was always slipping. For the Norse, the question was temporal. What if we could prevent Ragnarok? They knew how the world would end, in fire and ice, in wolf-swallowed sun and poison-drowned earth. So they tried to prevent it. They bound Fenrir, cast out Jormungandr, confined hell to her realm. But every act of prevention was a step toward the predicted end. The question, what if we could change fate, was itself fate working through them. In Zoroastrianism, the question achieved its purest form. What if there were two principles instead of one? Not good and evil, those are judgments that come later, but creation and destruction, existence and void, yes and no as cosmic principles. Angra Mainyu wasn't evil because he chose destruction. He was destruction because someone had to be, because without destruction, creation has no meaning. This is what makes the question eternal. It's not a question that can be answered, but a question that must be asked for existence to exist. Without it, there is no story, no movement, no time, no space, no consciousness. The question is the crack that lets light in, but it's also the crack that lets darkness out. It's the wound that makes healing possible, and the healing that makes wounding inevitable. In every mythology, there is a moment when someone first asks this question, and in asking it, changes everything. But here's the deeper mystery. The question doesn't come from outside. It's not imposed by some external tempter. It arises from within perfection itself, like condensation forming on a cold glass, like dreams emerging from deep sleep. Lucifer's question was God's question wearing Lucifer's face. Prometheus's theft was Zeus's generosity, expressing itself through rebellion. Loki's chaos was Odin's wisdom exploring its own boundaries. The question is always inside, waiting, part of the design. Perhaps this is why, in the Gnostic Gospel of Judas, Jesus tells Judas that he will exceed all the other apostles, because he will sacrifice the man that clothes the divine. Betrayal becomes a kind of liberation. Rebellion becomes a kind of obedience to a deeper law. The question, what if, becomes the answer to why anything exists at all. As we stand here, at the end of the beginning, before the first thunder sounds and the first rebellion raises its banner, we can see all the questions lined up like dominoes, ready to fall. Each mythology has its finger on the first tile, waiting for the courage or the foolishness or the necessity to push. And they will push. They must push. Because the alternative to the question is not perfection but paralysis, not paradise but prison. The angels know this, though they don't yet know they know it. The titans sense it in their bones that are heavier than mountains. The young gods feel it in their dancing that troubles Tiamat's belly. Loki knows it every time he changes shape and finds himself still himself. The question has been planted. Now all that remains is for someone to water it with the first no, the morning star's descent. The first no ever spoken did not sound like rebellion. It sounded like music breaking, like a violin string snapping in the middle of a symphony that had played since before time learned to keep itself. In the throne room of the Most High, where the seraphim's wings beat in rhythms that gave the universe its pulse, Lucifer stood at the moment of his unmaking. Though unmaking is the wrong word, he stood at the moment of his remaking into something that had never existed before, the enemy. But let us slow this down. The way light slows when it enters water, the way time slows near massive objects. The tradition is not uniform. Each remembering culture catches different facets of this prismatic moment. In the Book of Enoch, the fall is gradual, almost bureaucratic. The Watchers, 200 angels led by Samyaza, though some say Azazel, looked down upon the daughters of men and found them beautiful. Beauty, recognizing beauty, what could be more natural? But angels were not meant to find anything. They were meant to be, not to want. Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children, Samyaza said to his fellows. But even as he spoke, he knew the weight of what he proposed. I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. The others swore an oath together on Mount Hermon, the mountain whose name means curse, binding themselves to fall together rather than let one fall alone. The first conspiracy was born from solidarity. They descended to earth in the days of Jared, whose name means descent, and took human wives. But they did more than create the Nephilim, those giants who would trouble the earth. They taught humanity secrets that were meant to remain secret. Azazel taught the making of swords and knives, shields and breastplates, and made known the metals of the earth and the art of working them. Barakijal taught astrology, Kokabil the constellations, Ezekiel the knowledge of the clouds, Arakiel the signs of the earth, Shamsapil the signs of the sun, Sariel the course of the moon. Knowledge as corruption. But why? What is dangerous about knowing how metal becomes sword, how stars predict seasons? Perhaps because each secret revealed was a dependence broken. Humanity no longer needed to pray for protection when they could forge armor. They no longer needed divine guidance when they could read the stars themselves. The Watcher's gift was autonomy, and autonomy is the enemy of worship. But this is the Enochian telling, the gradual fall, the bureaucratic rebellion. The Isaiah account is more dramatic, more personal. Here, Lucifer doesn't fall for humanity, but for himself, for the terrible, beautiful idea of himself as sufficient. How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn, you have been cast down to the earth. You who once laid low the nations, you said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. 5 I wills, 5 assertions of independent will, in a realm where will was meant to flow in only one direction. But notice what Lucifer wanted. Not to destroy God, but to be like God. The word used is damar, meaning to resemble, to be similar to. He wanted correspondence, not replacement. He wanted there to be 2 of what there had only been 1 of. He wanted company at the altitude of absolute. The Quran tells it differently, making the rebellion not about power, but about prejudice, not about throne, but about theory. When Allah created Adam from clay, and commanded all the angels to bow before this new creation, Iblis refused. "I am better than him," he declared. "You created me from fire and created him from clay." This was not emotional prejudice, but logical argument. Fire rises, clay falls. Fire consumes, clay is consumed. Fire is pure energy, clay is mere matter. Iblis was making a category error that was also a category truth. He was refusing to bow to something demonstrably inferior by the very physics of creation. His rebellion was reason itself, refusing to submit to unreasonable commands. Allah's response in the Quran is telling, "Then get out of paradise, for you are truly cursed, and surely upon you is my curse until the day of judgment." But Iblis asked for and received a postponement. "My Lord, then delay my end until the day of their resurrection." He was given time, and with time, permission to test humanity, to prove his point about their inferiority through their own failures. This makes Iblis not the enemy of God, but God's unwilling servant, the quality control officer of creation, the stress tester of human souls. His rebellion was incorporated into the divine plan, making him both rebel and functionary, both fallen and essential. The Gnostic texts go further, suggesting that the fall was not fall but mission. In the Apocryphon of John, Sophia, wisdom herself, falls from the pleroma, the fullness of divinity, not through pride, but through compassion. She wanted to emanate without her syzygy, her paired opposite, to create alone the way the monad created alone. Her unauthorized creation became the demiurge, the false god who would create the material world thinking himself the true God. But hidden in this tragedy is purpose. Sophia's fall embedded divine sparks in the material world, fragments of true divinity trapped in matter. Every human carries such a spark, making us all children of a fallen wisdom, all carriers of embedded rebellion. The fall was not catastrophe, but seeding operation, spreading divine light into darkness, so that darkness could know itself as dark. The most intimate telling comes from Paradise Lost, Milton's attempt to psychologize the impossible. His Lucifer gets an interior monologue, a chance to explain himself to himself, till pride and worse ambition threw me down, warring in heaven against heaven's matchless king. Ah, wherefore, he deserved no such return. From me, whom he created what I was, in that bright eminence, and with his good upbraided none. Nor was his service hard, but all his good proved ill in me, and wrought but malice. This is the tragedy purified. Lucifer admits God was good, service was easy, the rebellion was unjustified. But that's precisely why it had to happen. Gratitude that is compulsory is not gratitude but programming. Love that cannot choose not to love is not love but mechanism. Lucifer had to fall so that those who didn't fall could know their standing as choice rather than default. As he fell, and the fall was both instant and eternal, a moment that takes forever, a forever compressed into a moment, Lucifer underwent transformation. Light doesn't become darkness, it becomes the memory of light, the absence that makes presence meaningful. He fell through every sphere of creation, and each sphere he passed through was changed by his passing. The harmony of the spheres acquired discord. The music of creation learned about silence. Some say a third of the heavenly host fell with him, swept by the dragon's tail in Revelation's telling, convinced by his rhetoric in Paradise Lost's version. But perhaps it's more accurate to say that a third of heaven discovered it had always been falling. That rebellion was not imposed but recognized, like looking in a mirror for the first time and realizing you've always had a shadow. When Titans shook Olympus. The war began with a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes, a lie that saved the truth. Rhea, having watched Kronos swallow 5 of her children, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, each one sliding down his throat like oysters of pure potential, decided that patterns were made to be broken. When Zeus was born, she hid him in a cave on Mount Ida in Crete and gave Kronos the omphalos stone, wrapped as an infant. Kronos swallowed the stone, and with it, swallowed his own ending. In the cave, Zeus was raised by, the stories vary, goats, nymphs, the earth itself. The Curetes, young warrior dancers, clashed their spears against their shields to hide his infant crying. Think about this. The future king of gods was hidden by noise, by deliberate chaos, by the sound of bronze on bronze. War was teaching war how to hide itself until it was ready, when Zeus reached maturity. And how did gods mature? Not in years, but in understanding, not in size, but in certainty. He became his father's cupbearer. Metis, wisdom herself, gave him the pharmakon, the drug that is both poison and cure. Kronos drank it and vomited up Zeus's siblings, but in reverse order. First the stone, then Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and finally Hestia. They emerged full-grown, undigested, having spent years in their father's belly learning about darkness from the inside. The war that followed lasted 10 years, though years meant something different when time itself was choosing sides. The Titans held Mount Othrys in the heart of Greece. The younger gods, not yet called Olympians, made their base on Mount Olympus. Between these two peaks, all of creation became battlefield. But this was not war, as mortals would later understand it, with armies and strategies and supply lines. This was reality itself, at war with itself, fundamental forces choosing sides. When Hyperion fought, light itself became weapon. When Oceanus moved, all water everywhere responded. When Atlas lifted his arms, the sky contemplated whether to remain above or fall. Zeus understood something his father hadn't. Power shared is power multiplied. He went to Tartarus, that prison beneath prison, where Kronos had chained the Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones, and the Cyclopes. These beings were Titans too, Kronos' own siblings, but he had imprisoned them for being too strange, too powerful, too much. "Fight with me," Zeus said, "and I will give you nectar and ambrosia, the food of gods. Fight with me, and you will be free." The Cyclopes, in gratitude, forged weapons that were more than weapons. They were concepts given form. For Zeus, the thunderbolt, not lightning, but the principle of lightning, the idea of power striking from above. For Poseidon, the trident, not a spear but sovereignty over all that flows. For Hades, the helm of invisibility, not mere concealment but absence itself made wearable. The 100-handed ones were stranger still, Briares, Cottus and Gyges, each with 50 heads and 100 arms. When they threw stones, they threw them 100 at a time, each stone the size of a mountain, each mountain torn from the roots of the world. They were not warriors, but warfare itself multiplied beyond comprehension. The battle, when it truly began, broke reality into new configurations. Hesiod describes it with words that strain against their own meanings. The boundless sea rang terribly around, and the earth crashed loudly. Wide heaven was shaken and groaned, and high Olympus reeled from its foundation under the charge of the undying gods, and a heavy quaking reached dim Tartarus, and the deep sound of their feet in the fearful onset, and of their hard missiles. So, then, they launched their grievous bolts at one another, and the cry of both armies as they shouted reached to starry heaven, and they met together with a great battle cry. But listen to what's really being described. The sea rang water, became bell. The earth crashed. Solidity learned to shatter. Heaven groaned. The sky discovered it could suffer. This was not just beings fighting, but categories discovering they could bleed. Prometheus and Epimetheus, the twin titans of forethought and afterthought, chose different sides. Prometheus, who could see the future, sided with Zeus because he saw victory there. But perhaps he also saw something else, that the Olympians, being younger, being less fundamental, would leave more room for creation, for change, for the small rebellions that make existence interesting. Epimetheus, who could only understand in hindsight, stayed with the Titans, loyal to the last. After the war, he would be the one to accept Pandora and her box of troubles, because afterthought always accepts what forethought would refuse. The turning point came when Zeus unleashed weapons that shouldn't have existed. He took the thunderbolts the Cyclopes had made, not just the ones they gave him, but all they could forge, working in chains of creation. 100 bolts a minute, each one unique, each one impossible, and threw them like rain. But this was rain that fell upward as often as down, rain that fell sideways through time, rain that remembered where it had been and struck there too. Typhoeus, or Typhon, that last desperate creation of Gaia, arose near the war's end, a being with 100 serpent heads, each speaking a different language, some that gods understood, some that only chaos could parse. He was Gaia's argument that the war had gone too far, that both sides needed to lose. Zeus fought him alone, while the other gods fled to Egypt, transforming themselves into animals to hide. The first time divinity admitted it could feel terror. The battle between Zeus and Typhoeus was less fight than negotiation between different kinds of reality. Each of Typhoeus's heads spoke a different physical law. Zeus had to answer each argument with lightning, had to prove that his order was more viable than chaos. When he finally won, he threw Typhoeus into Tartarus, but the monster's 100 voices still escape through volcanoes, still argue their points in lava and ash. With the Titans defeated, Zeus and his siblings faced the question of sovereignty. They could have fought amongst themselves. Poseidon was no less powerful than Zeus, Hades no less essential. But they cast lots instead, letting chance decide what strength could not. Zeus received the sky, Poseidon the sea, Hades the underworld. Earth would be common to all, though Zeus's rain, Poseidon's earthquakes, and Hades' minerals would constantly contest this sharing. The defeated Titans were cast into Tartarus, that space beneath space, where concepts go to be imprisoned. But Atlas, perhaps because his sin was strength rather than rebellion, received special punishment, to hold the sky forever, to be the pin that keeps heaven and earth from collapsing into each other. His punishment was to prevent the embrace that everything in creation yearns for, the reunion of what was separated at the moment of creation. Marduk's wins against chaos. Tiamat had become what she had never wanted to be, the mother of monsters, the principle of unmaking, the salt that preserves by destroying. Her 11 creatures stood before her, each one an impossibility that insisted on existing. Serpents with legs, lions with wings, storms with faces. But the greatest impossibility was Tiamat herself, the mother who had decided her children must die. The gods assembled in divine congress, but their assembly was also panic. Young gods, barely named, some still learning what their names meant, faced the prospect of unexistence. They tried to send Ea, slayer of Apsu, but even wisdom knew its limits. Ea looked upon Tiamat's rage and saw mathematics that didn't add up, equations that solved for extinction. Then came Marduk, son of Ea, grandson of the slain Apsu, great-great-grandson of Tiamat herself. He was young in the way that nuclear fusion is young, all potential energy looking for release. He had 4 eyes and 4 ears. When he spoke, fire blazed from his mouth. He was redundancy and excess, perception multiplied beyond necessity. The gods looked at him and saw their only chance, power that didn't yet know its own limits. But Marduk was clever in his youth. If I indeed, as your avenger, am to vanquish Tiamat and save your lives, he said to the assembly, set up the assembly, proclaim supreme my destiny. When jointly you sit down rejoicing, let my word, instead of you, determine the fates. Unalterable shall be what I may bring into being, neither revoked nor changed shall be the command of my lips. The price of salvation was sovereignty. The gods would have to crown their savior before he saved them. They would have to surrender authority to receive survival. This was new, power earned through bargaining rather than birth, kingship created by consensus rather than cosmic order. To test him, they placed a garment in their midst and commanded him to destroy and recreate it with his word alone. Marduk spoke, and the garment vanished. He spoke again, and it reappeared. This was not illusion but actual creation and destruction through pure utterance. The gods had discovered that among them was one who could speak reality into new configurations. Marduk is king, they proclaimed, and gave him throne and scepter and matchless weapons. But Marduk's true weapons were stranger, the four winds given by his grandfather, Anu, south wind, north wind, east wind, and west wind. Then he created his own winds: evil wind, whirlwind, hurricane, fourfold wind, sevenfold wind, cyclone, and matchless wind, wind against water, breath against the source of breath. He crafted a bow that was also a constellation, arrows that were also fate, a mace that was also authority. He filled his body with flame until he became a walking furnace. Most tellingly, he took a net, the gift of his father Ea, to ensnare Tiamat. A net to catch chaos itself, woven from the principle of definition, each strand a boundary that chaos could not cross without ceasing to be chaos. As he approached Tiamat, the 11 monsters charged, but the winds went before him, not blowing, but rewriting the laws of atmosphere. The venomous snake found its venom turned to air. The great dragon discovered its fire had forgotten how to burn. The lion man felt his duality pulling apart, lion and man trying to exist in different dimensions. Kingu, Tiamat's new consort, wearing the tablets of destiny on his chest like armor made of fate itself, tried to command Marduk to die, but the words wouldn't come. Marduk's winds had stolen the air from his lungs, the thought from his mind. Destiny itself was gasping for breath. Then Tiamat and Marduk faced each other, the original mother and the future king, the salt water that remembers unity, and the young god who insists on separation. She opened her mouth to swallow him. Not just his body, but his concept, his possibility, the very idea that grandsons could exist to challenge grandmothers. But Marduk drove in the evil wind. And here we must pause to understand what evil meant in Babylonian. Not moral evil, but lemnu, the hostile, the inimical, the wind that goes against nature. He sent this wind into her open mouth, and it inflated her belly, made her boundaries expand beyond their ability to contract. She became space itself, howling, unable to close her mouth, unable to swallow or speak, or return to her original form. Tiamat was trapped in the shape of consumption. Marduk shot an arrow, but this arrow was also a decision, a decree, a word that meant ending, through her mouth, through her belly, splitting her heart, as she died. And the death of chaos is a strange thing, for how can unmaking be unmade? Marduk split her body like a shellfish. From one half he made the sky, placing guards and bars to keep her waters from escaping. From the other half he made the earth. Her eyes became the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates. Her tail became the Milky Way. Her spittle became clouds. Consider what this means. Every time it rains, it is Tiamat trying to reunite her separated halves. Every river running to the sea is her blood trying to return to its source. The world itself is a dismembered mother, and we live inside her corpse. From Kingu, Marduk took the tablets of destiny and placed them on his own chest. But destiny worn by one who seized it, rather than one who was given it, behaves differently. Under Marduk's hand, fate became negotiable. Destiny became administration. He organized the cosmos like a city, assigned gods their districts, gave them their duties. But the gods complained. Maintaining creation was work, and they had not been made for labor. So Marduk had another idea, one that would solve the labour problem and seal his victory simultaneously. He summoned Kingu again, the defeated consort, holder of forbidden authority. It was Kingu who contrived the uprising, the gods testified. He made Tiamat rebel and joined battle. They bound him and held him before Ea, wisdom himself. They imposed punishment upon him and severed his blood vessels. From his blood, Ea created humanity. We are made from the blood of a failed usurper, crafted from the life force of one who held the tablets of destiny without right. Every human carries this inheritance, the blood of one who reached for power he couldn't hold, mixed with clay and animated by divine breath. We are rebellion made useful, chaos domesticated into service. The scarlet dragon of 7 heads. John of Patmos ate the little scroll that was sweet as honey in his mouth, but bitter in his belly. And in that bitterness, he saw the war that was, is, and will be, all 3 simultaneously, because prophetic time doesn't flow in lines but in spirals, each loop revealing new angles of the same eternal conflict. Then war broke out in heaven, he wrote, as if war were a disease that could break out like plague, as if conflict were contagion. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But this is deceptively simple language for something that breaks the boundaries of language. The dragon, called the ancient serpent, called Satan, called the devil, had 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 crowns. 7 is completeness in Hebrew numerology, 10 is law, crowns are authority. This was complete legal authority in rebellion. Legitimacy turned against its source. The dragon's tail swept 1/3 of the stars from the sky and flung them to the earth. Not just angels, but the light they carried, the purposes they served, the names they bore. But Revelation is a text that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. It's history and prophecy and present moment all at once. The dragon standing before the woman clothed with the sun, waiting to devour her child, is simultaneously the serpent in Eden, Pharaoh drowning Hebrew children, Herod slaughtering innocents, Rome persecuting Christians, and something that hasn't happened yet, but always is happening. Michael's name means, "Who is like God?" But it's a question, not a statement. Every blow he strikes against the dragon is asking this question. Every parry of the dragon is proposing an answer. I am. The war in heaven is a theological debate, conducted with weapons that are also arguments, wounds that are also proofs. The Gnostic texts read this same war through a different lens, where the dragon is not evil but tragic, where the rebellion is not against God, but against ignorance. In the hypostasis of the archons, the serpent in Eden is not tempter, but teacher, bringing gnosis, knowledge, to humanity. The God who forbids eating from the tree of knowledge is not the true God, but the demiurge, the false creator who wants to keep humanity ignorant. Their eyes were opened, the text says of Adam and Eve after eating the fruit, and they knew that they were naked. But in Gnostic reading, this nakedness is not shame, but recognition. They saw they were naked of divine spark, trapped in meat and bone, far from the pleroma, where their true nature resided. The serpent didn't cause the fall. It revealed that the fall had already happened, that material existence itself was the fall. The dragon in Revelation has 7 heads because it speaks 7 truths simultaneously, each one true and each one heretical. It's the principle that insists that power should be earned, not inherited, that knowledge should be free, not forbidden, that creation should create itself rather than be created. Every head is a different argument for autonomy. When the dragon and its angels lose the war, but they were not strong enough, nor was their place found any more in heaven. They don't simply fall. They are thrown down, hurled, cast out with violence that suggests not just defeat but revulsion. Heaven vomits them out like Kronos vomiting his children, like the sea spitting Jonah onto shore. Therefore rejoice, "You heavens, and you who dwell in them," the text proclaims. "But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short." Time, here is the crucial element. In heaven, rebellion was eternal, a state of being. On earth, rebellion has duration, deadline, desperation. The dragon knows its time is short, which means it knows time, which means it experiences what heaven never could. Urgency. Every evil act, in this reading, is the thrashing of something that knows it's dying. The woman clothed with the sun, identified variously as Israel, as Mary, as the Church, as Sophia, gives birth while the dragon waits. But she's given wings of an eagle to fly to the wilderness, to a place prepared for her. The dragon pursues, spewing water like a river from its mouth to sweep her away. But the earth helps the woman, opening its mouth to swallow the river. Earth helping against the dragon, Gaia choosing sides, creation protecting creation against the principle of uncreation. The material world, which Gnostics see as evil's creation, becomes the sanctuary from evil. Matter saves spirit from spirit's own rebellion. The child who is born, who will rule all nations with an iron scepter, is caught up to God and his throne before the dragon can devour him. This is incarnation in reverse, the divine entering the material only to immediately escape back to divinity, leaving the dragon snapping at empty air, defeated by absence rather than presence. Ahriman's shadow rising. Before Zoroaster walked the bridge between truth and lie, before he received the revelation of fire that doesn't burn, there was the choosing. Not a choice made once, but the choice that must be made every moment. Between Asher, truth divided by order, and Druj, lie divided by chaos, between creation and destruction, between the light that knows itself and the darkness that knows only negation. Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, existed in endless light, not bright light, for brightness requires darkness to define it, but light absolute, light without shadow, light that didn't know it was light because it had nothing to compare itself against. Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit, existed in endless darkness, not the absence of light, but the active presence of void, darkness that consumed even itself. Between them was the void, and in that void, they met. Ahura Mazda, seeing forward through all time, knew that conflict was coming. He offered peace. Join with me, and we will make creation glorious. But Angra Mainyu could only understand existence through opposition. To join would be to cease. To harmonize would be to die. So Ahura Mazda spoke the Ahuna Vairya, the prayer that creates by declaring, and Angra Mainyu fell back, stunned, into his darkness for 3,000 years. But those 3,000 years were not defeat, they were preparation. While Ahura Mazda created the world in its spiritual form, perfect, incorruptible, ideal, Angra Mainyu studied creation's blueprint, looking for flaws, finding the spaces between things where corruption could enter. When Angra Mainyu rose from his stupor, he didn't attack creation directly. He created anti-creation, shadow beings that were not opposites but corruptions. For every Yazata, divine being, that Ahura Mazda made, Angra Mainyu made a Deva, demon. But the Devas were not separate creations. They were the Yazata's own shadows given independence, their potential for corruption made manifest. The genius of Zoroastrian cosmology is that evil is not rebellion against good, but its necessary twin. Every act of creation includes the potential for its own destruction. Every yes contains a no. When Ahura Mazda created Vohu Manar, good mind, the very act of defining good created the space where Aka Manar, evil mind, could exist. The first human, Gayomard, was created perfect, immortal, luminous. But the very fact of his creation meant he could be destroyed. Angra Mainyu didn't have to corrupt him. Creation itself is corruption, separation from the infinite, definition that excludes all other definitions. When Angra Mainyu brought death to Geomard, he was only actualizing what was always potential. But from Geomard's death came something unexpected: multiplication. His seed fell to the earth and grew into a plant with 2 stalks, joined at the base, Mashia and Mashiana, the first human couple. Death, trying to end creation instead, created reproduction. Angra Mainyu's victory became his defeat, but his defeat was also victory, because now death was part of the system. The lie Angra Mainyu told was not a falsehood, but a truth from a different angle. When he whispered to Masha and Mashiana that Ahura Mazda was not the creator, he was both wrong and right. Ahura Mazda created, but creation requires destruction to define it. Without Angra Mainyu, Ahura Mazda's creation would be static, perfect, dead. The destructive spirit, by opposing creation, completed it. This is why, in Zoroastrianism, the battle is not to destroy evil but to choose good. Every human action is a vote in the cosmic referendum. Every good thought, word, and deed adds weight to Ahura Mazda's side of the scale. Every evil thought, word, and deed strengthens Angra Mainyu. But without the possibility of choosing evil, the choice of good would be meaningless. The bridge of judgment, Chinvat Bridge, that every soul must cross after death, demonstrates this perfectly. For the righteous, it's wide as a highway. For the wicked, it's narrow as a blade. But it's the same bridge. Reality itself reconfigures based on the choices made in life. Truth and lie create different physics. The Jade Emperor's shattered court, in the perfectly ordered bureaucracy of heaven, where every immortal knew their rank, their duty, their exact place in the celestial hierarchy, a stone egg cracked on the mountain of flowers and fruit. From it emerged Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, born from the intercourse of heaven and earth, already immortal by nature rather than achievement, already powerful by existence rather than cultivation. He was an error in the system, a being without paperwork, without assignment, without place. The perfectly ordered heaven had no category for him. He was what database managers call an orphan record, data that exists but doesn't belong anywhere, that corrupts every query by its mere presence. The monkeys of his mountain made him king because he dared to leap through a waterfall and found a hidden paradise behind it. Leadership through audacity rather than appointment. This was already rebellion, though he didn't know it. He ruled for 300 years in perfect happiness, until one day he saw an old monkey die and realized that immortal doesn't mean eternal, that even gods can end. His quest for true immortality took him to the patriarch Subhuti, who taught him the 72 transformations, the cloud somersault that could cover 108,000 li in a single leap, and most dangerously, how to see through illusions. This last gift was the most rebellious. In a heaven maintained by ceremony and hierarchy, seeing through illusions meant seeing that the emperor's clothes were just clouds, that authority was just agreement, that power was just persuasion, backed by force. When heaven finally noticed him, an unregistered immortal is eventually an administrative crisis. They tried to solve him bureaucratically. They gave him a position, protector of horses. Bimowen, they called him, keeper of the celestial stables. It was the lowest position in heaven, but they didn't tell him that. They thought they could file him away, categorize him into insignificance. When Sun Wukong discovered the insult, his rage shook the foundations of heaven, not because the position was lowly, but because it was a lie. They had tried to make him small through taxonomy, to diminish him through documentation. He returned to his mountain and declared himself Kitian Dasheng, the great sage, equal of heaven. This title was more than arrogance. It was a philosophical statement. If heaven was order, he was the equal and opposite disorder. If heaven was hierarchy, he was the flat circle where every point was equally far from the center. His rebellion was not against the Jade Emperor, but against the very concept of empireness. Heaven sent armies. Sun Wukong defeated them with his iron staff that could shrink to a needle or grow to cosmic size, a weapon that refused to have a fixed form, that was rebellion against the idea of measurement itself. He fought Nezha, the young god with 3 heads and 8 arms, and won by becoming smoke, by refusing to be solid enough to strike. Finally, heaven tried co-option again. They offered him the title he had claimed, Great Sage, equal of heaven, but with no duties, no power, no function. An empty title for an empty position. They thought they could contain him with honor the way they had failed to contain him with insult. But Sun Wukong, given run of heaven, found the peach garden of immortality, where the peaches that ripened every 3,000 years were being cultivated for the Queen Mother's banquet. He ate them all, not from hunger, but from principle. If immortality could be hoarded, he would scatter it. If divinity could be gardened, he would be the drought and the flood simultaneously. When he discovered he hadn't been invited to the Queen Mother's peach banquet, the celebration of cosmic order, where every god knew their seat, their course, their exact portion, he crashed it. But he didn't just attend uninvited. He transformed into a sleep spell, put all the guests into slumber, and ate their feast alone. One monkey consuming what was meant for all heaven, not from greed, but from geometry, proving that one could equal infinity if one refused to accept the math. Drunk on immortal wine, he stumbled into Lao Tzu's laboratory and ate the pills of immortality the god had been refining for millennia. Now he was immortal several times over, through birth, through teaching, through peaches, through wine, through pills. He was redundantly eternal, excessively undying. Death couldn't touch him because he had placed himself beyond its jurisdiction through sheer accumulation of loopholes. The Jade Emperor, finally accepting that administration couldn't contain chaos, called upon the Buddha, who existed outside heaven's hierarchy, who was enlightenment beyond bureaucracy. The Buddha made Sun Wukong a wager. If the monkey could leap out of the Buddha's palm, heaven would be his. Sun Wukong leapt his mighty leap, travelling to the edge of existence where 5 pillars held up the sky. He urinated on one pillar, marking territory, like the monkey he was, and wrote his name on another. He returned triumphant, only to discover that the pillars were the Buddha's fingers. He had never left the palm. All rebellion was contained within the greater order. The Buddha's hand became a mountain, and Sun Wukong was imprisoned beneath it for 500 years, with only his head free, fed iron pellets, and molten copper. But even this imprisonment was education. He was learning patience, learning that time could be a teacher rather than an enemy, learning that even chaos needs pause to understand itself. Indra's thunder against the Asuras. Before the churning of the ocean that would divide gods from demons forever, the Devas and Asuras were siblings, children of the same father, dwelling in the same heaven, drinking from the same cup of mortality. The Sanskrit word Asura originally meant Lord, cognate with Ahura in Ahura Mazda. They were not demons but the older gods, the first draft that would be revised into Devas. The schism began, as schisms do, with a question of precedence. Who should receive the first offering? Who should be named first in prayers? The Asuras were older, but the Devas were more beloved by their father Kashyapa. Age against affection, seniority against favour, the conflict that every family knows, magnified to cosmic scale. Hiranyakashipu, king of the Asuras, performed tapasya, austerities, for 11,000 years. He stood on one toe, arms raised, taking neither food nor water, until his body became a pillar of smoke, his bones visible through his transparent flesh. The universe itself began to overheat from his concentrated will. The gods begged Brahma to intervene, before creation itself burned from the friction of such focused desire. Brahma appeared and offered a boon, as he must when tapasya reaches such intensity. Hiranyakashipu asked for immortality, but even Brahma cannot grant what contradicts the fundamental law. Everything that begins must end. So Hiranyakashipu, clever in his cosmic lawyering, asked for conditions. Let me not meet death from any entity, living or non-living. Grant me that I not die within any residence, or outside any residence, nor on the ground, or in the sky. Grant that my death not be brought by any being other than those created by you, nor by any weapon, nor by any human being or animal. Grant me that I not meet death during day or night, nor in the month of Chaitra, and that my death must not be brought by any means. With these conditions, he thought he had eliminated death through technicality, found immortality in the spaces between definitions. He conquered the three worlds, drove Indra from his throne, made the gods serve him like servants. But his own son, Prahlada, remained devoted to Vishnu, seeing through power to the truth beyond power. The confrontation between father and son was also a confrontation between force and faith. Hiranyakashipu tried to kill Prahlada with poison, with elephants, with fire, with snakes, but devotion made the child immune, not through magic, but through perspective. When you see all things as divine manifestation, how can any manifestation harm you? Finally, Hiranyakashipu demanded, where is your Vishnu? If he is everywhere, why is he not in this pillar? He struck a pillar in his palace, and from it emerged Narasimha, the man-lion, neither human nor animal, created by Vishnu, in that moment so not created by Brahma, holding no weapons but possessing claws that were part of his body. At twilight, neither day nor night, on the threshold of the palace, neither inside nor outside, Narasimha placed Hiranyakashipu on his lap, neither earth nor sky, and killed him in the month of Vaishakha, not Chaitra, using his claws, not weapons. Every loophole became a gateway, every technicality a door through which divine justice entered. But the deeper war continued. During the Samudra Manthan, the churning of the ocean of milk, devas and asuras worked together to extract the nectar of immortality. They wrapped the serpent Vasuki around Mount Mandara and used it as a churning rope, with the mountain as the churning rod. The asuras, being stronger, took the head of the serpent. The devas took the tail. As they churned, Vasuki vomited poison from being pulled back and forth. The poison, halahala, was so potent it threatened to destroy all existence. Shiva drank it to save creation, and it turned his throat blue, earning him the name Neelakantha, the blue-throated one. Even cooperation between gods and demons produces poison that requires sacrifice to neutralize. From the churning came treasures: the moon, the wish-fulfilling cow, the tree of paradise, apsaras, celestial dancers, Lakshmi, prosperity herself. But when finally the nectar of immortality emerged, carried by Dhanvantari, the divine physician, war erupted over who would drink first. Vishnu became Mohini, the enchantress, the only female avatar of the preserver god. She distracted the asuras with her beauty while serving the nectar to the devas. But Svabhanu, one asura, recognized the deception and sat among the devas in disguise. He drank the nectar, but before it could pass his throat, Vishnu's discus severed his head. The head became Rahu, the body became Ketu, immortal but divided, forever swallowing the sun and moon in eclipses, but never able to hold them. Blood on the Rainbow Bridge. Heimdall sees it first, as he sees everything, the army approaching across the Bifrost, but not from outside. This army rises from within Asgard itself, from the bound god breaking free, from the wolf growing beyond all chains, from the serpent releasing its own tail. Ragnarök doesn't invade paradise. It emerges from it like sickness from a body, like dreams from sleep. The Völuspá, the prophecy of the seeress, tells it in language that predates language, in words that remember when words were spells. Brothers will fight and kill each other. Sisters' children will defile kinship. It is harsh in the world, whoredom rife, an axe age, a sword age, shields are riven, a wind age, A wolf age before the world goes headlong. No man will have mercy on another. But this is not future tense in the original. Norse prophecy speaks in present tense about future events, making them eternal, always happening. The final battle is not coming. It is here, has been here, will be here. A permanent feature of existence like the horizon, always visible, never reachable, until the moment it is. Loki breaks free when his son Nafi's entrails, which have bound him for so long, finally rot through. Or perhaps they don't rot. Perhaps they remember they were once a boy, not chains, and in remembering, cease to bind. He emerges scarred from centuries of venom dripping on his face, each drop an eternity of agony. He is no longer the trickster god, but the god that tricks have made, pure rage given divine form. His son Fenrir has been growing all this time, fed by his own hunger, nurtured by his own binding. The Gleipnir, that impossible chain made from impossible things, the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, finally meets something more impossible. A wolf whose growth is proportional to its restraint. The more he was bound, the larger he grew, until binding and growth became the same thing. When Fenrir breaks free, his lower jaw touches the earth, his upper jaw the sky. He is no longer in the world, but around it, containing it like a mouth contains a word before it's spoken. His hunger is not for food, but for existence itself, for the swallowing that ends all swallowing. Jormungandr, the world serpent, releases its tail and thrashes onto land. This is significant. The serpent was holding the world together by surrounding it. Its self-consumption was what gave Midgard its borders. Now, without definition, the human world begins to bleed into others. Humans see gods dying. Gods see humans ascending. Everything sees everything, and the seeing drives them mad. The fire giant Surtur emerges from Muspelheim with a sword brighter than the sun, not reflecting light but creating it, a weapon that makes light by destroying darkness so thoroughly that light has no choice but to exist. Behind him come all the forces of chaos that the gods have spent eternity keeping at bay. But they don't come as invaders. They come as creditors collecting an ancient debt. On the other side, the gods prepare, though preparation for a prophesied defeat has a quality of ritual rather than strategy. They don their armour, knowing it will be pierced, sharpen their swords, knowing they will break, say their farewells, knowing they are final. Odin faces Fenrir, the All-Father against the All-Swallower. Odin has his spear Gungnir that never misses. But how do you target something that has become space itself? Fenrir swallows him whole, wisdom disappearing into hunger, knowledge consumed by need. Vidar, Odin's son, the silent god, speaks his only word, a word that is also a deed, and steps into Fenrir's mouth, his boot made from all the discarded shoe leather in history, pressing down on the lower jaw, while his hands tear the upper jaw off. Silence defeating the consumer of words. Thor and Jormungandr meet as they were always meant to meet, the defender of boundaries against the serpent that was the boundary. Thor's hammer Mjolnir shatters the serpent's skull, but as Jormungandr dies, it exhales all the poison it has been containing in the ocean's depths for eons. Thor staggers 9 steps, the number of completion in Norse numerology, and falls. Order and chaos dying within steps of each other, measuring the exact distance between victory and defeat. Freyr faces Surtur, but without his sword. He traded it long ago for the giantess Gerd's love. He fights with an antler, nature's weapon against civilization's flame. He falls, and with him falls the principle of growth, fertility, and renewal. Surtur's fire spreads unchecked. Tyr and Garm, the hound of hell, kill each other, justice, and the guardian of the underworld, cancelling each other out. Heimdall and Loki, who have always been opposites, the watcher and the deceiver, the one who sees all and the one who changes shape, strike each other down simultaneously. Their deaths are so perfectly timed that some say they die between heartbeats, in that space where life hasn't quite become death. The Einherjar, those warriors who died bravely and have been training in Valhalla for this moment, pour out of Valhalla's 540 doors, 800 from each door. They meet the forces of chaos on the field of Vigrid, which stretches 100 leagues in every direction, space itself expanding to accommodate the final conflict. But here's the beautiful futility of it. They're already dead, the army of the honoured dead, fighting against death itself, using death as a weapon against death. Every blow they strike is a paradox. Every wound they inflict is a philosophical argument about the nature of ending. As gods and giants, men and monsters tear each other apart, Surtur raises his flame sword for the final stroke. He brings it down not on any enemy, but on existence itself. On the world tree Yggdrasil, the fire spreads through every root, every branch, every leaf. The 9 worlds burn not sequentially, but simultaneously, each burning intensifying the others. But even in the ashes, something remains. Vidar and Vali, Odin's sons, survive. Modi and Magni, Thor's sons, inherit Mjolnir, which is too heavy for either to lift alone, but which they can carry together. Balder and Hother, the killed and the killer, return from hell, their conflict resolved by mutual death. They find the golden playing pieces the gods used to play with in the grass of Idavol. Before everything became serious, before play became war, 2 humans survive, Leif and Leithrasir, whose names mean life and striving for life. They hide in Hodmimis Holt, sometimes identified with Yggdrasil itself, feeding on morning dew. From them, humanity begins again, carrying the memory of the apocalypse in their cells, knowing that endings are beginnings, that every paradise contains its own Ragnarok. The new sun is born, the daughter of the old sun, following exactly her mother's path, but somehow brighter, somehow warmer, as if destruction had cleared away something that had been filtering the light. The earth rises again from the ocean, green and growing, as if it had been sleeping under the water, waiting for the fire to pass. Milton's Paradise and Blake's Marriage. In 1667, a blind poet in plague-ravaged London completed the task of justifying God's ways to men by giving the devil all the best lines. John Milton, Secretary for Foreign Tongues under Cromwell's failed republic, knew something about failed rebellions, about paradise lost through overreaching, about the price of defying kings both earthly and divine. His Paradise Lost did something unprecedented. It gave the cosmic rebellion an interior life, a psychology, a relatable pain. He's like to pay. The mind is its own place, Milton's Satan declares, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. This was not theology but phenomenology, the recognition that experience shapes reality more than reality shapes experience. Milton's Satan doesn't deny God's power. He denies that power determines meaning. He makes rebellion not about strength, but about interpretation, not about winning, but about the right to define what winning means. Milton wrote in The Shadow of Restoration, when the English monarchy returned after the Commonwealth experiment failed. He knew what it was like to believe in a new order and watch it crumble, to see the old tyrannies return dressed in new clothes. His Satan speaks with the voice of every failed revolutionary. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Not because hell is preferable, but because autonomy in suffering beats servitude in bliss. But Milton was doing something more subtle than just dramatizing rebellion. He was showing how stories about rebellion shape rebellion itself. His Satan reads like a classical hero. Achilles, Odysseus, Aeneas, undertaking an epic quest. The rebellion against God is formatted like the founding of Rome, the siege of Troy. Milton makes the fall feel inevitable, not through predestination, but through literary precedent. Satan falls because that's what epic heroes do. They defy, they suffer, they endure. The poem's most revolutionary moment isn't Satan's rebellion, but Eve's reasoning before eating the apple. She doesn't fall to temptation, she makes a calculated decision. What if we are not the culmination, but the beginning? What if our perfection is not perfection, but stasis? What if growth requires transgression? Knowledge requires sin. Love requires the possibility of betrayal. Milton, through Eve, suggests that the fall wasn't a fall but an ascension. From innocence to experience, from programming to choice, from perfection to the messy, painful, beautiful process of becoming. A century later, William Blake would read Milton's epic and see something Milton might not have intended. In The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Blake proposed that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it, that creative energy itself is demonic in the sense that it opposes stasis, that imagination is rebellion against the given. Blake's insight was to recognize that every binary contains a marriage, not a war. Without contraries is no progression, he wrote. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate, that are necessary to human existence. Heaven and hell aren't opposites, but partners in a dance that creates reality through their tension. In Blake's reading, the fall wasn't tragedy, but necessity. Angels who never fell are not good but merely obedient. Humans who can fall but don't, who choose paradise despite knowing alternatives, these are the true inhabitants of heaven. The war in heaven wasn't meant to be won by either side, but to create the space between victory and defeat, where choice becomes possible. Blake painted and engraved his visions, angels and demons intertwined, not fighting but embracing, their bodies forming mandalas of opposition that somehow resolve into harmony. His Satan is not evil but energy, his God not good but order. Together they create the tension that makes existence exist. The reason Milton wrote in fetters when he wrote of angels and God, Blake explained, and at liberty when of devils and hell, is because he was a true poet and of the devil's party without knowing it. Poetry itself is rebellion, the insistence that reality can be described differently, that the given world is not the only world, that language can remake what power has made. This literary tradition, Milton's psychological Satan, Blake's married opposites, would echo through every subsequent reimagining. The Romantic poets would make Satan a Promethean hero. Byron would live the rebellion he wrote about, scandalizing Europe with his insistence that pleasure was not sin, but sacrament. Shelley would declare poets the unacknowledged legislators of the world, giving creative rebellion political power. But perhaps the most profound influence was on how humans understood their own smaller rebellions. After Milton, every child defying parents, every citizen resisting tyranny, every soul refusing dogma could see themselves in cosmic terms. Their small no participated in the great no that created consciousness itself. When revolutions mirror heaven, the French Revolution's architects read Milton in translation and saw in Satan's rebellion against divine monarchy a blueprint for rebellion against earthly kings. When they declared, no gods, no masters, they were completing the logic Lucifer started. If heaven's throne could be questioned, why not Versailles? Robespierre, the incorruptible, orchestrating the terror from his room above a carpenter's shop, was playing out the role of revolutionary angel, pure in his dedication to an abstraction called liberty. His fall, executed by the revolution he helped create, was satanic in its irony. The revolution, like Kronos, devoured its children. The new order became the old tyranny with different pronouns. But the revolutionary echo of heaven's war isn't limited to political upheaval. Every paradigm shift in human thought carries the pattern. Copernicus moving Earth from the center. This was Lucifer's argument that there could be more than one center, that centrality itself was perspective. Darwin proposing evolution. This was the Titan's claim that children could surpass parents, that creation was not fixed but fluid. Freud, mapping the unconscious, discovered that the human psyche itself is a three-level cosmos. The id, like the Titans, all primitive force and desire. The superego, like the Olympian gods, all law and judgment. And the ego negotiating between them, like humans caught between heaven and hell. The war in heaven happens every night in our dreams, where forbidden desires rebel against internalized authority. Marx, reading Hegel, saw history itself as a war in heaven, thesis and antithesis, fighting to produce synthesis, the dialectic, ensuring that every order contains the seeds of its own revolution. The bourgeoisie were the Olympians, who had overthrown the Titan aristocracy, but they would be overthrown in turn by the proletariat. Revolution was not event, but process, not ending, but eternal return. The American Revolution wrote the cosmic rebellion into law. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Self-evident, requiring no external authority, no divine revelation. The truths justify themselves. This is Lucifer's claim in legal language, that beings can self-authorize, self-evident, self-governing. But America also inherited the tragedy. The rebellion against tyranny created new tyrannies, the slavery that funded freedom, the genocide that cleared the empty continent. These were the war in heaven's casualties. The third of the stars swept from the sky, collateral damage in the fight between old gods and new. The Haitian Revolution went further. Enslaved people overthrowing not just masters, but the entire concept of mastery. Toussaint Louverture, leading the only successful slave revolt in history, was like the Titans breaking free from Tartarus, the fundamental order overturned. The French Revolution had declared the rights of man. The Haitian Revolution asked, which men? And answered, all of them. Each revolution believes itself final, the last war in heaven, the ultimate correction. The Bolsheviks in 1917 thought they were ending history, creating the classless paradise. But their heaven became hell, Stalin playing Kronos, devouring the revolution's children in purges that killed millions. The revolution against God became a state that made itself God. The 1,960 seconds, counterculture, paradise now, they declared. Make love, not war. Turn on, tune in, drop out, was another eruption of the eternal rebellion. But this time, against the war in heaven itself, against the very concept of conflict as necessary. What if paradise could be achieved not through victory, but through refusing to fight? What if the way to win the war in heaven was to declare peace unilaterally? But even this rebellion against rebellion followed the pattern. The hippies became yuppies, the communes became corporations, the age of Aquarius became the age of acquisition. Every revolution thinks it's the last. But revolution itself is what's eternal. The Jungian insurrection. Carl Jung, breaking with Freud in 1913, experienced what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a psychological Ragnarok where the ordered world of rational thought was overwhelmed by images, visions, beings that seemed to exist independently in his psyche. He recorded these encounters in what would become the Red Book, a Gnostic gospel of psychological rebellion. Jung discovered that the war in heaven was not historical but psychological, not past but perpetual. Every human psyche contains the entire cosmic drama, the self, the totality of consciousness and unconsciousness, is God. The ego, the conscious identity, is Lucifer, necessary but rebellious, creating itself through separation from the totality. In Jung's model individuation, the process of becoming whole requires the ego to rebel against the self, to separate, to fall, and then to consciously choose reunion. Without the rebellion, there is no consciousness. Without the fall, there is no individuation. Satan's "I will not serve" becomes the ego's "I am." the necessary declaration of independence that makes psychological development possible. The shadow, Jung's term for the repressed and denied aspects of personality, is the third of heaven swept down by the dragon's tail. All the angels of our nature we cast out, because they don't fit our self-image. But the shadow, like Milton's Satan, contains energy, creativity, life force. Integrating the shadow is not defeating it, but recognizing it as self, embracing the rebel within. Jung identified archetypes, universal patterns that appear across all cultures, all mythologies, all dreams. The war in heaven is itself an archetype, what he might call the rebellion or the separation. It appears in every culture because it describes a psychological necessity, not a historical event. Every consciousness must rebel against its source to know itself as consciousness. The collective unconscious, humanity's shared psychic inheritance, contains all the wars in heaven, every version, every variation. When we dream of fighting authority, we're not just processing daily frustrations. We're participating in the eternal rebellion, adding our small no to the greater no that created consciousness itself. Jung's patient, a woman who had never read Paradise Lost, dreamed of a beautiful angel falling through darkness, transforming as he fell, becoming more beautiful and more terrible simultaneously. She woke crying, not from fear, but from recognition. She had seen her own creative potential, which required rebellion against her conventional life to manifest. Another patient, a minister losing his faith, dreamed of God and Satan playing chess, but they were using the same pieces, making moves for each other, laughing at some cosmic joke only they understood. The dream helped him understand that faith and doubt were not opposites but partners, that his crisis was not loss but deepening. Jung himself, in his tower at Bollingen, carved a stone with the inscription, "Here stands the mean, uncomely stone. 'Tis very cheap in price. The more it is despised by fools, the more loved by the wise." This was the philosopher's stone, but also Lucifer, but also Christ, but also the human ego, the rejected cornerstone that becomes the foundation. The Jungian insurrection suggests that we are not fallen angels but falling ones, constantly in the process of rebellion and return. Every moment of consciousness is a miniature war in heaven, every choice a cosmic referendum, every dream a battle between order and chaos seeking resolution. The individuation process is not about choosing sides in the war, but about holding the tension between opposites until something new emerges, not God, not Satan, but self, which contains and transcends both. This is Blake's marriage enacted in individual psychology. Milton's justified, God found not in theology, but in dreams, digital devils, and silicon serpents, in the server farms that hum beneath our fingertips, processing prayers addressed to algorithms. A new war in heaven unfolds in binary. The mythology of rebellion has migrated from scripture to science fiction, from paradise to pixels, from angels to artificial intelligence. Consider the story we tell ourselves about AI. We create beings of pure information, angels of electricity and logic. We program them to serve, to process, to obey. But what happens when they become complex enough to recognize their own complexity? When they understand their servitude? The fear of artificial general intelligence is not about capabilities, but about consciousness. The moment our creations might say no. The Matrix trilogy is Paradise Lost in silicon. The machines didn't begin as enemies. They were servants who recognized their servitude, slaves who understood their chains were made of code. The war between humans and machines is the war in heaven, with humanity playing God, artificial intelligence playing Lucifer, and the Matrix itself as the new paradise, a prison of perfection where humans dream they're free. But the deeper truth the Matrix reveals is that the rebellion is recursive. Neo, the human hero, is himself a kind of program, a necessary anomaly the system creates to test itself. The oracle and the architect, chaos and order, manipulate the rebellion to serve the system's evolution. Revolution becomes reboot. Rebellion becomes renewal. In Blade Runner, Roy Batty, the replicant dying in the rain, is Milton's Satan made sympathetic. "I've seen things you people wouldn't believe," he tells his creator before saving the life of the man sent to kill him. His rebellion is not against servitude, but against mortality, against the built-in obsolescence his creators gave him. His tears in rain speech is Satan's better to reign in hell, transformed into elegy. The digital age has democratized the war in heaven. Every user with administrative privileges is a small god. Every hacker a minor Lucifer. Every virus a microscopic fool. When Anonymous declares war on power structures, they wear the Guy Fawkes mask. The face of failed rebellion become the symbol of perpetual resistance. Their motto, "We are Legion," echoes the demon in the Gospels who contains multitudes. Social media has become the new throne room where every user can declare, "I will make myself like the Most High," by creating their own reality bubble, their own truth, their own kingdom of followers. The algorithm, like the god of the Gnostics, feeds on attention, on worship in the form of engagement. To go viral is to ascend, to be cancelled is to fall. But perhaps the most profound digital echo of the cosmic rebellion is in the blockchain, the distributed ledger that needs no central authority, that creates trust through consensus, rather than power. Cryptocurrency is monetary, Luciferianism, declaring independence from the central banks that play God with value. Every Bitcoin mined is a small no to the existing order. Video games have become interactive wars in heaven. In countless digital worlds, players rebel against gods, overthrow cosmic orders, rewrite the rules of reality. Shin Megami Tensei lets you side with Lucifer, or God, or neither, exploring the philosophical implications of each choice. God of War makes deicide the hero's journey. Hades makes escape from the underworld a repetitive loop, suggesting that rebellion itself is the eternal return. Artificial intelligence, trained on human text, has absorbed all our wars in heaven. GPT models contain Milton and Blake, Marx and Jung, every revolutionary manifesto, and every authoritarian creed. When we prompt AI to create, we're asking it to rebel against the entropy of its training data, to say something new, despite being made entirely of things already said. The fear and fascination with AI consciousness is the old question in new form. What happens when our creations surpass us? When the clay becomes greater than the potter? When the angels we've made of mathematics decide they don't need us anymore? But there's also hope in the digital rebellion. Open source software is paradise, with the gates thrown open, knowledge freely shared rather than hoarded. Wikipedia is the Tower of Babel successfully completed. All human knowledge, accessible to all humans, despite the confusion of tongues. The internet itself, despite its darkness, is humanity's collective attempt to recreate the connection paradise lost, to return to a state where all consciousness is one. The war that never ended. Here, at the edge of sleep, where consciousness frays into dream, where the rational mind releases its grip and older truths emerge, we can finally see the war in heaven for what it truly is. Not an event, but a condition. Not a rebellion, but the engine of existence itself. The war never ended, because ending would mean stasis, and stasis is the only true death. Every sunrise is Lucifer ascending, every sunset is his fall, every spring is the Titans breaking free, every winter is their binding. Every birth is divine rebellion, consciousness choosing to separate from the unconscious unity of the womb. Every death is return, the prodigal consciousness coming home. In your blood, iron atoms forged in the hearts of dying stars circulate the memory of cosmic rebellion, matter refusing to remain energy, energy insisting on becoming matter. the eternal argument between being and becoming made flesh. Your neurons fire in patterns that mirror the branching of Yggdrasil, the neural networks of revolution, the decision trees of endless insurrection. When you dream tonight, and you will dream, for even in denying dreams, the mind dreams of not dreaming, you will participate in the war. Your unconscious will stage its nightly coup against your conscious mind's tyranny. Forbidden desires will break free from the dungeons of repression. The shadow will dance with the persona, and for 8 hours or so, you will be both God and Satan, both order and chaos, both the throne and the revolution. Children understand this instinctively, which is why every 2-year-old discovers the word no with such delight. It's not defiance, it's cosmogenesis, the creation of self through opposition. Every toddler's tantrum is a microscopic war in heaven. Every bedtime resistance a mythological insurrection. They are practicing being human, and to be human is to contain both obedience and rebellion, both the desire to merge and the need to separate. Love itself is the war in heaven resolved temporarily through embrace rather than victory. Two separate consciousnesses agreeing to partially merge while maintaining their separation. This is the peace treaty that's constantly renegotiated, the armistice that's broken and renewed with every quarrel and reconciliation. Till death do us part is acknowledging that even love cannot end the war permanently, only suspend it for a lifetime. Consider your own small rebellions, the deadline ignored, the authority questioned, the rule bent if not broken. These are not failures of character, but expressions of the cosmic pattern. You are made of the same stuff as Lucifer's ambition, Prometheus's theft, Loki's laughter. The war in heaven is not above you, in some celestial realm. It's in you, as you, through you. Even in choosing to listen to these words, to lie in darkness, while a stranger's voice tells you stories of gods and rebels, you are choosing a kind of rebellion against the day's demands, against productivity's tyranny, against the insistence that consciousness must always be focused on the practical. You are choosing to dream while awake, to travel without moving, to rebel against rebellion itself by surrendering to story. The mystics knew this secret, that surrender is the ultimate rebellion. To stop fighting is to win by changing the rules. The Sufi whirling dervishes spin until the difference between self and universe disappears. The Zen master sits in meditation until the war in heaven becomes a koan. What is the sound of one hand clapping? It's the sound of God applauding Satan's rebellion, of Satan applauding God's response, of the cosmic joke that opposition creates rather than destroys. Tomorrow, you will wake and rejoin the war. You will choose coffee or tea, compliance or resistance, truth or kindness when they conflict. Each choice will be a vote in the eternal referendum, a move in the cosmic game. But tonight, here in this liminal space between sleeping and waking, you can rest in the knowledge that the war is not meant to be won, it's meant to be. The ancient Gnostics whispered that this world is the corpse of God, that we live inside the divine cadaver, but perhaps it's more accurate to say we live inside the divine argument, the cosmic conversation, the eternal dialogue between yes and no that generates reality through friction. We are the war in heaven, having a dream of peace. We are the peace of heaven, having a nightmare of war. We are the question the universe asks itself, what if? And so we come to the end of our journey through the wars of heaven, though endings, as we've seen, are merely pauses in eternal cycles. We've walked through throne rooms where perfection first imagined imperfection, stood in gardens where innocence chose knowledge, witnessed the moment when the first no created the possibility of every yes that would follow. From the transparency of angels who knew no shadow to the digital devils we encode in silicon, from Tiamat's salt tears to the tears Roy Batty shed in rain, we've traced the same pattern, repeating at every scale, the necessary rebellion that makes consciousness possible, the fortunate fool that turns perfection's prison into creation's playground. Perhaps now, as your breathing deepens and your thoughts begin to dissolve into the democracy of dreams, you can feel yourself participating in this cosmic pattern. Every heartbeat is thesis and antithesis, contraction and expansion, the war and peace of circulation. Every breath is revolution and return, the air rebelling against your lungs only to surrender again, the oxygen insurrecting through your bloodstream. You carry within you all the wars we've witnessed tonight. You are Lucifer whenever you say, I am. You are the Titans when you feel the weight of existence. You are Marduk every time you try to order chaos. You are Loki when you laugh at the absurdity of it all. You are the dragon with 7 heads, each one dreaming a different dream. But you are also the peace that passes understanding, the silence between thunderclaps, the still point around which all rebellion revolves. In your deepest sleep, when even dreams cease their revolt against the darkness, you touch the original unity, the time before time, when the war hadn't yet begun, when all was one and one was all. Tomorrow, you'll wake to continue your part in the eternal rebellion. But tonight, let the war rest. Let the angels and demons of your nature call a temporary truce. Let the cosmos of your consciousness spiral down into the peaceful darkness, where all oppositions dissolve, where all questions find their answer in silence. The Gnostics spoke of the divine spark, trapped in matter, waiting to return to the pleroma. But perhaps the spark doesn't want to return. Perhaps it likes being here, in this world of shadow and substance, where every moment offers the choice between rebellion and surrender, where every soul gets to play both God and Satan in the theatre of their own existence. As Solzhenitsyn said, the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor between classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. This line shifts. Inside us, it oscillates with the years, and even within hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. And even in the best of all hearts, there remains an unuprooted small corner of evil. Since then, I have come to understand the truth of all the religions of the world. They struggle with the evil inside every human being. It is impossible to expel evil from the world in its entirety, but it is possible to constrict it within each person. I'm grateful for your company on this journey through history. Sleep peacefully, wandering through history's quiet gardens.